you in high school bought your class ring? I know I did. Who bought, or who actually earned their Letterman jacket? Ooh, okay. Ooh, we got some people. Okay. How many of you bought your yearbook in high school? How many still have your yearbook from high school? Okay, that's cool. It's kind of nice look back on those things and look at how we changed. How many of you still have your Letterman jacket? Okay. How many of you still have your class ring? Yeah, well, I know with mine, I had it, and when I was in high school, I remember I saved up for that ring because my parents weren't buying that ring for me. And so I saved and saved and saved and saved and saved and bought a very nice, expensive class ring. In my day, and in my standards, it was a nice class ring. But I sold it, I don't know, years ago, back when Tim and I were really poor. And, took it down to one of those gold and coin shops. I got quite a bit of money for it because it had gold in it. It was gold. And because at that time, I said to myself, really, why am I keeping this thing? It doesn't mean anything anymore to me. It's lost any significance that I had. We were over at Robin Chester's in Bend a while back, and Robin over there must be the keeper of all that is GCI, WCG. He has this heated garage, and everything's dry, and these beautiful cabinets, and he opened the doors, and in it were all the yearbooks from all the years. Robin never went to Ambassador College, but he had all the yearbooks, and we spent hours just kind of pouring through those and looking at people going, oh my goodness. I don't know why Robin's keeping those, and I don't think Robin understands why he's keeping those either, but one of these days he'll probably go. So what was once a proud symbol doesn't really have any meaning or significance anymore. Y'all might wear your Letterman jacket to a reunion or something like that, and you'll pour over yearbook pictures at a reunion, but really that's really the only significance that has anymore. What was something to look forward to, like earning that money for that class ring and achieving and receiving that class ring, it's just now a relic of the past, right? Baptism today is often viewed this very same way. Parents bring their newborns to church, they get that first baptism, that first communion, and then that's the last you see of that family. A person comes to church, an adult comes to church because they're feeling like, hey, there's got to be something more in my life, and I feel God, he's kind of speaking to me, and so those little heartstrings get tugged on, and so he comes and finds a church, and he asks for baptism, and he gets baptized, and then all of a sudden he goes, okay, I did that. Now what's next? He's thinking that maybe this baptism is going to that's the thing he needs. That's the ticket to having his life get turned around, making him feel better. How many of you have asked that kind of same question when you got baptized? Like, what now? What do I do now? It's no wonder that baptism feels more like an ending and not a beginning. It follows a profession of faith, something that God has been working in us perhaps for a very long time. And so it's not surprising that many feel like this symbol of faith is like that culmination of their life and think, wow, what's next? Well, one thing we can know for certain from Jesus' baptism is that it is not an ending, but it is a beginning. So last week was Epiphany Sunday, and today is the first Sunday in the season of Epiphany. And as a reminder, Epiphany means a manifestation or a showing forth. It's the season where we look at the stories of Jesus' life to gain an unveiling of the mysteries once concealed, and those mysteries that Paul spoke about in Colossians. And in 1:26-27 it says, "The mystery that has been kept hidden for ages and generations, but is now disclosed to the Lord's people. To them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." So different stories of Jesus are typically explored during this season as they help us see God's revelation. It only makes sense that we look at the story of Jesus' baptism today, the beginning the beginning of his ministry. And as we look at this story, we are given an epiphany of who God is for us. Kind of like what Anthony talked about. I really have to talk to him about that. I might as well not even be up here, but we'll see. Maybe I could shed a little bit more light. The passage begins with Jesus coming to John the Baptist to be baptized. And so here are just a few facts before we get into that whole thing. I'm going to set the stage for you about Jesus and where he was baptized, and that was the Jordan River, and you all know that. And so I have a few little slides here that will kind of set the scene of what it may have looked like in Jesus' time, and then maybe what it looks like in today's look at the Jordan River. Definitely different. The Jordan River flows from the top of Mount Hermon, where the snow melts and travels down to the lowest point on earth, which is the Dead Sea. And for the most part, the Jordan River is neither beautiful nor peaceful. This is one little stretch that one might say is peaceful. I'm not sure it's beautiful. That's more typical as it runs down the mountain. And there's one more that's, whoa, that's a violent river. That is a fast-moving river. And they get rain just like here. They get rain, and that rain has to go somewhere. So it's just flying down that river. It's 25% mud and plunges downhill at a furious pace, falling 9 feet per mile. Amid the not-so-beautiful, sometimes furious river east of Jericho, there is a peaceful and beautiful bend called the Ford of the Partridge. It's a place of great beauty, shaded by willows and eucalyptus trees, much as it was in the New Testament times. And so this is a view of the Jordan, and that's on the other side, those buildings are in Jordan. So it means this side Israel, that side Jordan. So there's strife there on both those sides of the border. In fact, when we were there were signs all over the place that said, don't go past this point, or you could step on a landmine and be blown up. So you got to stay on the path. And it's still that way. They're still finding unexploded mines. So here along the banks of the Jordan comes Jesus. And boy, didn't that challenge John's way of thinking at first, because he resists Jesus. We heard that in the reading that John did. We see this response played out in our lives and the world at large as Jesus comes to us. The gospel always elicits a response, does it not? God is the one who takes the initiative in coming to us, and we are left with either resisting or accepting him. In John's case, as we can often relate, he first resisted and then he consented. I wonder why people do that, why they resist. I think it's because maybe they know that if they make that acceptance and consent to God, that maybe it's going to change what is going on in their life, because maybe they like their life. You know, and they don't want someone to come in like God and mix it up and change it up when I'm fine, you know, everything's good for me. I don't need God. So there's an epiphany in this portion of the story that we can explore before even going further. Notice that it is Jesus who takes the initiative to come to John. Jesus comes to John. John's whole ministry was characterized by preaching in the wilderness and having people come to him. Jesus, on the other hand, does not stay in Galilee waiting for John and others to come to him. He goes out. And we can see a turn in how Jesus will do ministry compared to the way John the Baptist had been doing his ministry. This tells us something about God's heart. It tells us that God is a sending God who comes to people where they are. Just like in that video that we listened to during the offering. Come as you are. Haven't we heard that spoken about in past sermons about God being a sending God? He doesn't wait until we find him. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. He finds us in our wilderness. When we were lost and walking in darkness, that didn't keep the Father from finding us and coming to us. This story gives us a glimpse into the Father's heart. He loves us and moves towards us to make himself known to us. We also see in John's response an effort to prevent Jesus from being baptized by him. John knows he is not worthy to baptize Jesus. Notice that Jesus doesn't throw up his hands and go, oh, well, John doesn't want to do it. I guess I'll just go find somebody else. No, he doesn't do that. He speaks to John in such a way as to change his response of resistance to a response where John finally says, yes, I will baptize you. So even our response to God's coming to us is God's work of grace, not anything we do. He doesn't let our unworthy responses prevent us from being encountered by God. God works in Jesus to sanctify our response, turning our rejections towards receptions of his work in our life. This story begins by revealing to us God's grace in coming to us and bringing us to himself. That's sending God. In John's hesitation to baptize Jesus, we can see John wrestling with a question that is essentially, well, who needs to be baptized? And I think there may be some of that question yet today. There may be those who say, why should I be baptized? The Jewish answer to that question was that only Gentiles who want to be a part of the Jewish community must be baptized. John's answer up to this point had been that Gentiles and Jews alike needed to be baptized. But Jesus comes along showing us that in order to fulfill all righteousness, not only do Gentiles and Jews need to be baptized, but also God himself needs to be baptized. This act on Jesus' part blows John's thinking of baptism, and no pun intended, out of the water. Jesus needs to be baptized, we say to ourselves. John responds with I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? As we let Jesus' baptism shed light on the mysteries of who God is, we can see that both parts of John's question can be answered in the affirmative. Yes, we need to be baptized by Jesus. That is, if we are going to be included into the life, the communion, that circle of Father, Son, and Spirit. We must be brought into this life, immersed into it by being baptized with the life Jesus shares with us. The Greek baptizo for baptize carries the meaning to dip or to immerse or to dye. And the picture is like a piece of cloth being soaked and saturated in a vat of dye. And the cloth is so penetrated with what it is immersed in that it shares the same qualities. How many of you have dyed anything? You dip that something into water and you don't even see it anymore because it takes on the color of what it has dyed, and all those who have done tie-dye t-shirts and all that sort of thing. Like an immersed cloth in a vat of dye, the Trinity has existed for all time in baptism. The Father, Son, and Spirit have for all eternity lived baptized, continually immersed, soaked, and saturated with love, joy, creativity, and overflow of shared life. Doesn't that sound like something you all want to be a part of? This baptized life of the triune God is shared with us in Jesus. So we indeed need to be baptized by Jesus for our inclusion and immersion into this communion. That's why we need to be baptized. Jesus comes in the incarnation and immerses himself into our sinful flesh. He enters fully into our darkness and death. In so doing, he is the light that overcomes our darkness, as he is the life that defeats death. Jesus tells John that it is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. Jesus' baptism is not something he does alone, but he does it with us. As he brings us into his baptism, we are included in his baptized life with the Father in the Spirit. As Jesus comes up out of the water, we begin to see what this baptized life looks like. Heaven is opened, the Spirit descends, and we hear the Father speak. As Anthony kind of told us what the Father's voice can sound like and the power that the Father's voice has, we get a fully Trinitarian involvement in Jesus' baptism. That's what we get. First, just as he comes up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. Now, Jesus' baptism is told by Matthew in such a way as to bring in some Old Testament stories loaded with a lot of theological content, because Matthew had an audience that he was trying to target. And the most obvious is the picture of creation given in Genesis. And there we have the creation of the heavens and the earth, where the Spirit hovers over the waters. Spirit hovering over the waters. And God speaks creation into existence. There's that loud voice again. In the garden, we see God's presence with his creation. God never intended for heaven and earth to be a barrier between the Creator and his creatures. In Jesus' baptism, we are seeing a restoration of this original intent. We are seeing the heavens were open to him. In Jesus, heaven and earth have once again come together. It has been restored. It's not in the process of being restored. It is restored. In Jesus, we have the presence of God walking with us as he did in the garden. We can also be reminded of another Old Testament story that has similar patterns, and that's the story of the flood. Another dove hovering over the waters. In this story, the ark is on the waters and that dove descends on it. In both the creation story and the flood story, we are dealing with God's creative and redeeming work. Jesus is now the center of God's work of creation and redemption. In Jesus' baptism, we have a new creation where heaven has been opened up. And second, we have a voice from heaven speak. And this is the Father's voice speaking to his Son. This is the voice that spoke creation into existence, and the voice we were created to hear. That's the only voice we are created to hear, truthfully, rightfully. We may wonder, well, what would God most want to say to us if he spoke to us? What words would he say? In this story, we have those words written down for us. And since Jesus is baptized for our sakes, we can hear the Father's voice speaking not only to Jesus, his Son, but he is also speaking to us as his adopted children. So what is it that the Father is saying to you today? Seeing that this is the Creator, our God, we would do well to memorize and meditate on these words that he is saying to us in Jesus Christ. The first thing he says to each of us is, "This is my child." How does it feel to belong? It is one of the deepest longings of our soul, is it not? To belong, to be claimed and wanted. How many children are filled with joy simply by hearing, "Hey, that's my son. Hey, that's my daughter." Not only is God telling us personally that we belong to him, but he is saying it out loud for all to hear. If anyone wants to tell you that you are not good enough, that you don't fit in, and that you don't belong, well, they need to contend with that voice that thunders from heaven, claiming and naming us as his own child. When we listen to this voice, the sting of rejection is emptied of its poison. Remember that. You are his child. The second thing the Father says to us is, "Whom I love." Whom I love. Not only are we claimed and named by the Father, but this Father loves us. Let's face it, there are some people that we would rather not belong to, right? We got some people in our life that's like, I really don't want to be a part of that. because they don't care about me. So why do I want to care about them? But we have to. But we are grateful and we are thankful that we have someone who loves us unconditionally. The blessing of belonging is found in the one to whom we belong. The Father is the one who loves us. To fill that out, remember who the Father is speaking to. He is speaking to his own Son, who he has loved for all eternity. His love for his Son is a perfect love, not a love that is self-seeking or filled with hidden agendas. He is saying to you and me that he loves us in the same way that he loves his own Son. Let that sink in. And unfortunately, I think for some, it's going to take a lifetime. I hope not. But the final thing that the Father says to you and me today is, with him I am well pleased. It's one thing to belong. It's another thing to be loved. But what an awe-inspiring thing it is to belong and be loved by one who also likes you, adores you, and favors you beyond belief. Can we really comprehend what it will mean to walk in the presence of God and by doing so bring a smile to his face? It may be hard to believe the Father is really saying these words to us, but he has said it to his own Son, who is baptized into our lives in order to baptize us into his. This is some of the mysteries unveiled in Jesus' baptism. And the triune God has baptized us with his life. Heaven is opened and the Spirit is given. May we see this Epiphany season, the Father, who says to us through Jesus and the Spirit that we belong to him, that he loves us, and that he is pleased with us. And all God's children said, Amen.
Amen.